Black Star was founded in Philadelphia
in a lineage of global anti-colonial struggle
on land which has been stewarded by the Lenape people for centuries.
We call in our Black, Indigenous, and Brown ancestors
who bent time and envisioned a freer, more tender world for us, one that we continue to reach for.
We honor all Indigenous peoples and their lands and acknowledge the ongoing genocide and displacement of Indigenous and Black communities.
Merely naming the people of this land is not an act of repair, nor is it a form of decolonization.
After all, decolonization is an unsettling thing.
We use this reminder as an opening
to consider ongoing self-determination movements of colonized people across the world.
From Palestine to Puerto Rico and everywhere in between.
The violence inflicted on our communities is immeasurable and irreparable.
Still, we gather in the spirit of generous and joyful exchange and other cultural expression.
As Tony Cade Bambara has shown us, through cultural work, we create space for imagination,
critique,
gathering,
pleasure,
love,
and radical care.
So I just want to ask again about the three places that you live. How do you find a sense of home going in between the places? Like, do you have the same setup in each city? Are they different sort of sides of your personality?
Well, it's actually both a privilege and a confusion sometimes to have three homes, but three homes are actually fully engaged with and fully like home. Also these days, like most of my life, I've worked from home. I have a study at home. And since COVID, my God, that's become the style everywhere. So in that sense, it's very similar in New York, in Delhi, and in Kampala. It's critical, the workspace, the home space, and I have it's very well appointed. For me, it's to do with engagement. The quality of feeling at home in each of these three continents, actually. And for me, the engagement is vital to give me a sense that I'm not just passing through.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe in nostalgia. I don't believe that I'm in one place, I want to dream of the other place. You have that in the beginning of this kind of a sojourn, one has that, but then it's pointless, So for me, it's about engagement in each place. And New York is in very many ways, I've lived there since 1979. It's in many ways a kind of my creative home, my creative community. People like myself from everywhere in the world, live there, and we've made our movies and many things together for the last 30 or 40 years. India, is where my family is, and where the culture and the politics and the engagement level for me is very, very strong, almost too strong, so that I almost get like eaten up. By everyday life, because I can't almost reflect on it that easily. But my work, as you know, has so many roots in India, even that a lot of times I'm working there, I'm shooting, I'm prepping, I'm casting, I'm building things there, but my family is there, which is very powerful, my mom and my brothers and so on. And we have our own home there as well, which gives me a great sense of roots myself. And Uganda, Kampala is where I've came now 32, almost 33 years ago to make Mississippi Masala, my second film. In fact, the house in the film is the house I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah, I read that.
With the extraordinary view of Lake Victoria outside my windows. And this place also is the most, in a way, unlikely of places for me to feel so rooted. But I do, because many years ago, almost 20 years ago, we started a film school called Maisha right next door to my home, a free school, a garden, a campus of sorts. And, over the years, 17 years of alumni, I just have plugged into the four countries that constitute East Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And so there's a level of engagement that is quite layered over the years, seeing our students, go from point A to God knows, the stratosphere sometimes.
Mhm.
And so, that way the lives are full in each place.
Mhm.
And and I'm and New York is very much a place that all my family, my son is there, a 30-year-old politician in New York, an assemblyman out of Queens, and my husband is a professor at Columbia, and I teach sometimes. But I mostly make movies, and mostly I'm doing this big stage musical that's hopefully heading to Broadway, and so a lot of. I mean, it's such a city of creative excellence. Wherever I need to get like juiced and excited and inspired in a certain direction, I can always find it in New York.
Mhm.
So I look to these spaces for different things, but most essential is that the homes themselves are cocoons in which I can work.
Mhm. Yeah. And is your husband from Uganda?
Yes.
Okay. So
He's
does
from
it feel like home? Does he have family there? Is that also part of it?
Yes, all in East
Mhm.
Africa. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is very much a family home.
Mhm.
Although we began this home, we built the home, we bought the home that we are in. It's the home of Mississippi Masala, but his parents have lived here, now passed on. His brother lives, in Kenya. His sister lives in Tanzania. It's all the East African consortium is alive and well.
That's wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood? Like, what were you into? I read that you didn't play with dolls, but I'm curious what you were playing with.
My childhood, my father was a civil servant in a very remote part of India, called Orissa, a very beautiful east coast on the sea.
Mhm.
That he was deputed with his colleagues to build the new capital in the 50s in Orissa. So I was born there. When I was raised there were sometimes no roads. The first airport was put in when I was 8 years old. It was a small town, seriously small town, but it had this extraordinary heritage of 2,000 temples from the 15th, 16th, 17th century, just dotted around the fields of where I grew up. So it was both enchanting as well as one could say, people said, oh, nothing ever happens here, but I never felt that way because there was always some enchantment. And I had two older brothers. So and when they played cricket, I was the fielder, I got the ball.
Yeah.
So it was a simple childhood, but it was a very interesting one because I was energized by traditional mythological theater that would come through the town. I was industrious by nature, and I wanted to see if I was a writer or a painter, and I would put my mind to the task. Like if a classical dancer was rehearsing in front of an incredible temple, I would go there, I would sit there, I would write about her, I would try to think, am I a writer, can I evoke this? I would sometimes, for a ridiculous period, I took Indian master artists' work and put it on the wall and copied it and thought, am I a painter? But very quickly, I studied music. I studied Indian classical music. But very quickly, my teacher for the sitar said to me, you can't pursue too many things. In order to excel, follow one path, And that was like my first aha moment because I had never thought of it like that. But it was very good advice because everything you do, especially these ancient arts like classical music, it takes decades, if not a whole life, to master. And so slowly but surely, my path came to actually the theater, where I became an actor, amateur actor, but for several years, through the end of school and college, and then joined a repertory company. And wanted to know if I could even make, and did make, political street theater, like theater to change the world. But that taught me that I had to go somewhere else, and that somewhere else was sort of unexpectedly, because no one at the age of 18 leaves the country to study undergraduate work somewhere else. But I did. I got a scholarship. I came to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and when I was 18, first time I left my place, and first time I think I was on a plane.
Mm.
And so and that was an interesting new world, being at university, and really having the anonymity. Firstly, no one knew who I was, no one cared.
Mm.
There's a line in Mississippi Masala: "This is America, ma. No one cares."
What emboldened you to leave, and also to pursue the arts? So often people's families want them to be, something professional, something that will, bring resources into their future. How did you know that you could pursue the arts as a real career? And how did you know you could leave home?
There's an odd paradoxical beauty about being a woman. And being the youngest in my family to two older brothers.
Mm-hmm.
My parents denied it, but there's a bug in my glasses.
Okay.
But my parents denied this not accusation, but I used to say that, your attention is always on my brothers, and that's why I'm left to do what I want. But that was true. And what I wanted, I was still finding out, but because I was a decent student and didn't bother anyone with, failing or getting out of, because I was all those things, they left me alone. And I found actually my own way. And the way was the performance and the arts and writing and so on. But they didn't really mind because I was a woman, and I was probably in their heart of hearts, designed for a good marriage somewhere down the line, But then, of course, I kept they gave me this nickname. Pugly is my nickname, which means mad girl, crazy girl, because I was always one. I never submitted to the arranged marriage, to this or that. I never did. And they didn't even know that I was applying to schools outside the country. Somebody else in this big city in Delhi told me to go to the US, American school, where they had this little room full of catalogs of universities. And I went there and just learned on my own and applied to the biggest universities because I thought they'll have money to bring me up, because I was a government servant's daughter. I was not somebody with money. I was well educated, but had no money. And so I applied to Harvard, to Yale, to Wellesley, to things I didn't really know, except I knew their aura, And I saw Love Story. I saw Ryan O'Neal and Valley McGraw cavorting about in the snow. And I thought, man, that place looked like it might have enough money to send a kid over, And it was just one of those things. I was good at what I did, I suppose. But, it's the luck of the draw. I got one full scholarship. That was from Harvard. And Yale lost my application. And Wellesley gave me 50%. So I couldn't afford the other 50.
Yeah.
So that was that. And my parents were taken aback. But my father kind of gulped when I gave him the big fat letter of admission from Harvard. And he said, the Kennedys went there. So thank you, Kennedys. You got me the license, and funnily, very beautifully, the coincidence was when I got there, my neighbor in the dormitory in the house was Caroline Kennedy.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
who is a lovely woman.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, when I was reading about you attending Harvard and meeting both your first husband, Mitch, who I know worked as a production designer and producer on some of your early films, and Suni Taraporavela, who has written so many of your films. I was like, I don't think of Harvard as like this artistic hotbed, And so it makes sense how you found it. I think it's similar to how many of us found colleges before the internet, just sort of randomly.
Yes.
And what did you find when you arrived at Cambridge as a young person?
I found that Americans were more culture shocked about being at Harvard than I was. Because they had grown up in Indiana and here and there and Oregon and wherever they were from, just like, oh my God, am I going to get in? It's going to be the be all and the end all, the whole putting it on a pedestal of some sort. And I didn't know about it. I just applied because I knew it was a big university that would have money, and I knew about its fame, but I didn't live with the myth of it for at all, So so that was, and anonymity, the fact that I was on my own and no one really was going to follow what I was doing there was very liberating, because it really teaches you, even though the beginnings are tough and a little lonely sometimes, but it wasn't much. It teaches you what you are and what you want to be, I suppose, and what you want to study. And the resources were so immense. Like, I loved this Irish poet, Dylan Thomas, and the beginning at Harvard, all I did in my spare time was listen to Dylan Thomas, on long playing records in the library, reciting his own poems. And I just, it was a revelation that I could just sit there and had headphones and get transported into Under Milkwood and poems that I had loved, but I'd never heard him recite. So that was one thing. But then I got involved, as I did in India, into theater and in performance. And slowly but surely, a year later, stumbled into filmmaking.
Can you talk a little bit about your artistic influences, either from growing up? I mean, you talked about the statues and the artists that you were putting on the walls, but as you arrived at Harvard and when you were coming, as a younger person, who were the filmmakers or photographers that you were influenced by?
Growing up in India, the influences were mostly through literature, and the reading of the classics, the reading of especially Russian literature, because somehow India and Russia were always linked. So the big fat tomes of War and Peace and all of them, Dostoevsky, everything was available very, very cheaply for us. And so first of all, from literature, from the real study of the written word and the literary word, in English, alas, more than in my own languages. And then it was performance. And when I became a theater actor, some of my heroes were abroad, like Peter Brook, like Joseph Chaikin, like Andrei Sarban. These were people I was to later meet in New York City. But the engagement was like everyone in the late 60s, music and politics, the Vietnam. Even though I was very young, we had a much greater worldview about the world than, say, I think Americans had about the rest of us, So there was an engagement and knowledge to some extent of other things, of other struggles going on in 68, Just a sorry.
No problem.
So it was, those were the influences, but the artistic ones really came to me much later at Harvard, where I was introduced to photography first, and was really taught through the study of photography, whether it be Arche or whether it be Cartier-Bresson or whether it be Raghuveer Singh, great Indian photographers as well. It all came from there initially, Of course, these were days before the internet, before all of that, and films 100% started only when I was 20 years old or 20 years old, because we grew up in a town without even, there was one cinema and it only played Dr. Zhivago. And in Delhi, we went to the cinema, but very, just not, I mean, I was not a big fan of Bollywood movies. I loved them to some extent, but I didn't pursue them, So the films I really started seeing as an art form only came in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when I was like 20 years old. Even the first great Indian director Satyajit Ray's films I saw in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is shocking because you'd never see it in India at that time, and then I was introduced to cinema, by our great teachers, and mostly through a cinema verite documentary. And my own teachers were Penny Baker and Ricky Leacock, who pretty much invented the mobile camera, and so it was an introduction to that whole world, really, in the States.
Yeah, that's incredible. Did you, as you were pursuing film, I'm curious how much of your training as an actor shows up in your directing?
A lot of it, a lot of, because for me, because I was an actor, I love and understand actors. I don't just demand actors do what I want. I have to find a way that will, open them to what I may need, and it's the process that I know and also love that I elicit all the time while making film. The other quality that really helps me in directing film was making cinema verite documentary film for the first 7 to 10 years of my life before I made Salaam Bombay, my first fiction film. And that helps because cinema verite, where you just surrender to the world that you want to film, where you have to establish a respect with that world, that you have to have great humility for it. You have to be a great listener, and you have to absorb and be receptive rather than impose on that world, right? And that is a very important ingredient of knowing how to direct, because knowing how to direct is, of course, needing a vision, having something to say, you want to say it, but the process on finding how to say it has to be one that is a dialogue, that is to do with humility, that is to do with a real give and take between the humans that you're collecting to take you on your journey, and that's a big thing, I think. The tradition of cinema verite and knowing how to just sort of be a fly on the wall, knowing how to just enter a place and make people feel comfortable and don't even sometimes regard you, is a very important, ingredient of learning about the world itself.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you prep for films? Are you assembling lookbooks? Are they digital? Are they on paper? How do you do that, and how has it changed over the years?
I think the bottom line of making any art or film is to film, especially because film is such a hugely collaborative task that you have to be a great communicator. You have to know how to communicate, and you have to learn how to make people bloom, not just call it from the top, at all. You have to know how people will do their absolute best for you. And you also have to recognize what their best is so that you want that. There's no point casting an actor with exquisite comic timing and giving him a tragic role to play of one note. It has to be max. My favorite word is maximize. You have to max it. You have to max the situation, max the intention of the scene. You have to max the performance, So I prepare in any way that I can in order that my communication on any level of set, costume, color, emotion, intention is actually shared with my heads of the department, my team, in the form of a lookbook, in the form of discussions, in the form of a lookbook that can be as varied as a commercial from Gucci to a frame from Buñuel, or to an entire episode of the Apu trilogy, or anything. It's a motley thing, bunch of stuff. fashion as well in there. So I prepare lookbooks quite systematically and then talk with all my team about it. Basically, get as much artistic sharing than that can happen, sometimes from scene to scene with my team, so that as we get closer to the set and as we get closer to the shooting, I conduct literally in silence. All this has been said before. So it's not about running around at the last minute and expending your energy, because a lot of it, when you're actually shooting, is like tabula rasa, a blank slate, emptiness that you now will receive everything that you've tried to put out. And the receiving is not from everybody being stock still and completely prepared. The receiving is actually from the universe, of things that happen that day, the lighting, the moon, perhaps the street kid you might have seen on the train to come to work, you pull him along, or whatever it is, you got to be alive to life itself, and also to the struggle of it. If somebody is having a hard time doing something, you have to find another way for them to do it that you want. Another way. You can't just say you just got to do it but better. You can't. And that'll happen only when you're fully prepared. So I try to prepare like that. It's never a rushed job. I really do take it seriously, so that you can speak softly and carry a big stick. I joke.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's true.
Well, I love that you talk about it in this way, because one of the things I've been really interested in with talking to filmmakers, throughout the years of the festival, I don't know how much this is in your world, but I feel like in my world, people are always talking about decolonizing X, Y, and Z, And so we've talked about decolonizing film sets because they're such, they can be sites of such harm, and they're, very militaristic and things like that. And so I was curious for you. I feel like women always get asked this question: how do you direct as a woman? But I really do think women lead differently. And, just because of nurture, right? Because of society, like you're leading differently. So I'm curious how your sets are different. Like what are the things that you're doing to bring your crew and cast to be in this, preparedness in a different way?
Well, one of the most obvious ways my sets are different is that we start in the morning with yoga. For 1 hour. It's on the call sheet. It's before call. It's voluntary. It's not demanded of you.
Yeah.
But it is an amazing, we always work with very senior Iyengar yoga instructors, not just fly by night anyone who knows and practices, but really I treat that position as seriously as a cinematographer would be, or anything, because they have to rock and roll with different levels of our experience and also different places that we would do it. So when I made Monsoon Wedding, I think I was 40 years old, and I was tired by then of being wrecked after every movie. You know? And I couldn't take it. So this doing and making and practicing yoga really increases one's strength and stamina, and kind of, I think, has a training of keeping the ego at the door. It sort of is very democratizing to have the movie star and the carpenter and the sound recordist all with their bums up in the air breathing. It equates us all. I think. Anyway, it's also a way to not get wasted during a movie, and to actually be more replenished, at the end of it than you were at the beginning. Many people tell me that they love to come and work with me because they know they can really be practicing very at a high level. Anyway, so that's one thing I do, but mostly it's to do with being prepared, Maori. It's to do with being prepared, communicating, and the leadership, the direction has to be porous. It's not hierarchical.
Yeah.
Although I say that I'm a very collaborative person, so long as I have the last word. I always joke about that. But it is true.
I totally relate.
In movies, directors have to lead the way and have to know what they want,
Yeah.
In theater, which I'm now doing, back to again, It's not like that. It's not so democratic. It's a whole team that is equally authoritative, and it's like a navigation one has to have, Anyway, so that's how I do it. It's such a privilege to make cinema, because cinema is such an encompassing of all the arts that one might love, like I do, music or painting or color or emotion, that in order to really make every moment work and be rich, you have to bring everyone along with you, and not just along with you, but to ask them to take you further. That's very important. Otherwise, you're just walking, stepping in the same river twice, and you can't do that. I mean, otherwise it's static water, and that's not, life is too short for stasis.
Yeah. Yes. I'm curious about how, you came of age, as you mentioned, in the late 60s, the early 70s, and there are these politically charged cinematic movements like Third Cinema, Cinema Engagé. I'm curious what your engagement is with, this concept of camera as a weapon and other sort of global South arts movements were at that time, and how did they show up in your work, if they do?
To be candid, it was the idea of changing the world that even led me to make cinema, or to, I felt that one would have the power much greater as a filmmaker than as an actor on a stage, precisely for that reason, that you are not in the hands of other people, that you had your own vision and you could make a point. And also because the medium itself is so populist and reaches so many. But it was never to make a pleasant Sunday afternoon at the movies type of movie. It was always to see whether art could change anything really. And I was blessed really to be able to do this in my very first feature film, Salaam Bombay, which was about street kids in Bombay, and very much an amalgam of my documentary life leading into my fiction life, and me casting real kids from the streets opposite unknown but professional actors, and filming in real streets and in real brothels and real places, but again structuring it, setting it up, fiction, but fiction based on utter reality, And so it was this amalgam that made Salaam Bombay what it is. And I really vowed at that time that we would use the profits of it to work with street children in our country. It's an enormous situation in India, where kids come from all over the country to Bombay, which is kind of like our Hollywood. And imagine that streets are paved with movies and gold, and then find themselves in a community of poverty and dreamers, and not as lethal and not as dangerous as Brazil and other places which have guns and high octane drugs. It's less violent in that sense, but it's abject poverty and children with not a childhood inside, So it was their spirit of resilience and survival that gave me the courage and dream to make this film. But I wanted to make their lives different or better, or be honored for who they were. So anyway, so that was the vow, is that if it were a success, we would make a foundation, a trust that would create centers for street children in Bombay and Delhi. And I'm really happy to tell you that because it was a hit. I mean, we won everything at Cannes in 1988. We went up to the Oscars. We sold the whole country, the whole world. We established Salaam Balak Trust, this foundation for street kids, in 1989 in Delhi, and it is still now 35 years old, and we have now like 17 centers across Bombay and Delhi. We have about 5,000 kids coming through and living in our centers every year. And it's just amazing. And we emphasize in the Salaam Balak Trust the arts. So kids are taught, besides vocational training, they're taught to draw, to sing, to puppetry and choreograph to dance. And every year it's a big event in Delhi where they do an annual, they write their own plays, they perform them, and they're really astonishing. And now, of course, our kids are grown and are mentoring our own other kids, young ones. And it's really been one of the great rewards. And it doesn't happen again, Maori. It doesn't happen that with every film you can do something like this. You know, it was a remarkable privilege that in the first film one could do it.
Yeah.
And since then I've done other ways, but mostly the galvanizing towards cinema was to do this, was to see if change could actually happen.
That's incredible. And yeah, I love that you are, you know, just over your career constantly sort of like pushing both these artistic, you know, boundaries and richness and goals, and then also having the kind of like, I wouldn't say political, but pursuing justice and access between Maisha, the Film Lab, and the foundation, and also with Salaam Bombay. So yeah, that's incredible.
Yes, I try because, you know, well, that is one thing quite literal. But the other thing that I try to follow as a child of living between worlds, between East and West, between brown and black, between brown and white, the whole gamut, is that, you know, the belief that we are who we are, and we are, we should not pander to what they don't know about us.
Yeah,
we should, you know, just take you on our journey to know that actually the world is incredibly similar and one. But we have never been given that. We've always been shown with an intermediary to explain who we are.
Yeah.
And no longer, a long time ago, no longer.
Yeah.
Does that have to happen?
Yeah.
So the main emphasis for me is to do that, is to actually never be grateful, but to bring our stories, to bring our color, to bring our poetry to a place where it is felt as your own, you know, because it's not about teaching, it's about actually expanding.
Yeah. No, I love that you say that, because there is this way in which so many, it's interesting. I love this push to say people of the global majority, right? Because Black and brown people are people of the global majority. But in the US and in Europe, you know, we talk about ourselves as a minority, right? Which is like reductive. And it is a great psychological game that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed with colleagues, that our initial pitch is always to sort of talk about ourselves the way we've been talked about, you know, and so to center whiteness, even if there are no white people in the film. And so what I loved in reading about your work was that you were like, there are no white people in this. I don't need white people in this. And I think I was reading with, was it Mississippi Masala, where you said they can be the waiters? You know, it was just like, I love that boldness. All the waiters will be white. That's incredible. And it's so bold, because so many people don't feel like they have the power to do that early on in their career in the way that you did. And so we've had, you know, with all of this.
Probably now in retrospect comes from the confidence of never being a minority.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
Being raised in an India where yes, there were big depraved class differences, but not that, you know, not the badges of color that separated us, or not the badges of, you know, of all that, of you know, then of religion. Even now it's a very different India.
Yeah.
But it's a very empowering thing, I guess, when you don't even, when people look like you know, and are you around, you know.
A lot of your projects, speaking of coming from a place and being in another one, are considering place and migration and diaspora. And so, you know, you've done between the Namesake and Mississippi Masala, and even in Monsoon Wedding, you know, you're contending with South Asians as they live across the globe. And I'm curious if you think you'll continue to explore that. Are you considering, any sort of Caribbean stories or Europe, are there other stories that you're sitting on?
Oh, plenty of stories. But I really believe that people should tell their own stories, that I'm not the one to tell the Caribbean story always, or the, European story always, just to say that. But sure, I'm sitting on a number of things, too many things.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing I've been doing for the last 12 years, and we've gone through the hiccups of COVID on that, is the adaptation of my hit film, Monsoon Wedding, as a Broadway-bound stage musical, which I've been directing. And now we are opening in November 22
Amazing.
outside America, and then May 23 in New York.
Amazing.
So that is, honors the tenets of the play, which of the film, sorry. It honors the tenets of the film, which is, as much as it is about sort of India becoming global in a Punjabi family, it is also about secrets in the family. It's also about the abuse that no one talks about. It's also about light and darkness, basically.
Yeah.
In the umbrella of love and so on. So that's one thing. But another thing we're actually sending in the script today, is we've been developing almost like a bit of a modern day version, in a sense, of Mississippi Masala, an intercultural, another interracial romance between between a young a Black musician in Atlanta, who has a relationship with a young Indian woman who then he discovers is a movie star, and he follows her to India. And there's this sort of Black-brown, another love story that is actually linked, in this case, by music. It's a musical feature film with the great Pharrell Williams doing the music. And so I've been cooking it together with writers, and will be directing it. And then I'm my own feature film that I'm writing now and hope to shoot next year is called Amri. It's Amrita Shergill, the great, fairly unknown modernist Indian painter, half Indian, half Hungarian woman, who died between the two world wars in 1941, very young, but who left.
Uh-oh. Oh no.
Right. And she was the epitome of, like,
Mira, I'm sorry. You just froze while you were describing Amrita. Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Okay.
You said half Hungarian, half Indian. Yeah.
My own feature film that I'm writing currently is called Amri, which is the nickname of Amrita Shergill, our great modernist painter, sort of our Frida Kahlo in a sense in India. Also the epitome of East and West. She was half Sikh and half Hungarian, and studied in Paris, but returned to India at 20 years of age, and really started what is now called the modernist movement in painting. But it's her work and her palette and her way of framing that has deeply taught me how to see. And I've loved her work forever. And now I want to make a film on her life, which was a full-on, full throttle life, where she lived very fully and without the rules of the world, and in doing so created her own art, and is a real model for me, and I think will be an icon for the world in the same way that Frida Kahlo became for the Mexican world.
Yeah.
But the world does not know Amrita Shergill, and I'm hoping that that'll change after my film is done.
Yeah.
So I have several things, Maori, going on, but I guess they're all to do with, in some sense, between, crossing borders and amplifying your life as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm thinking about, and I was thinking about in doing the research on you, and I feel I first I encountered your work with Mississippi Masala. I was in, I think, 8th grade and saw it with my mother. And, I think the way I felt about it then and how I feel about it now are very different. But what I can see looking at other pieces of your career is that you have a real understanding and way with textile and with color, and clearly like your relationships to costume design and production design. But then you're also really engaged with your actors and, bringing out these incredible performances, identifying incredible actors. And then also you can feel the justice creeping through, right? And so to hear you talk about your background in documentary, and this interest in the, experience in the theater, and then bringing all of these into your cinema is really powerful. And there's no question there. It's just sort of like an observation, because it's, I've been interested in those things as well, and often been challenged between like, am I a documentary filmmaker, or am I making magical realism, or am I, going to work in social justice, and finding a way to, take all of who you are and bring it into the work, I think is so incredible. But because Mississippi Masala was recently restored, I did want to ask you, how did you come to that story in particular? Did you spend time in the U.S. South? Like, what's the origins of that?
Well, the origin of Mississippi Masala, which I call sometimes the hierarchy of color, of being brown between black and white, actually the seeds of it were formed in university when I went to Harvard, and was indeed playing that game myself, of being a brown kid between two communities that were accessible to me, and yet had lines that I also sometimes felt, and that was an interesting thing that I pursued, and I looked and studied and as to where had this epitomized itself, in the world. And just through reading, came across the Asian expulsion by Idi Amin in Uganda in 1972, where Indians who had lived here for 3 generations were suddenly given 90 days to leave the country. And I had never been to the continent of Africa. I had never, but I found it extraordinary that Indians who had never known India, who considered themselves still Indian, but in Africa, suddenly had to be uprooted and go find a home for themselves. And through reading, I found also, oddly enough, that many of these Ugandan Asian exiles came to the dirt poor Mississippi at that time, because it was dirt poor, because they could buy for $14,000 an entire motel sometimes, and that they could just employ their own families and get done with it and make their way without even sometimes knowing English. So it was like, this is a trick of history to have Indian Ugandan Asians who had never known India suddenly be asked to leave to come to to come to the birthplace of the civil rights movement in Mississippi, which is an African American community, ancient, from ancient times almost, and of African Americans who had never known Africa, and so, like, what happens if somebody falls in love with somebody else, know? And of course, it's much more complicated, because the Indians from here are very much identify themselves as African, So it's a very interesting sort of layered complication. And so I kind of cerebrally cooked up this premise. What if, there is that interracial love? Then with that kind of idea, Suni and I, my writer and myself and others, we started embarking on almost a 6-month tour of the South, as we lived in these motels. It was very much the cinema verite tradition, gathering the research over a year, meeting everyone, seeing how these motels run, hearing their dreams of where they had left. And everyone spoke of that, that green of Uganda, you throw 2 seeds over your shoulders, tomorrow you're plucking papayas. They would all say the same kind of dreamy thing about Uganda. And finally, I said, we've got to go and see where they came from. And that was our first trip to this continent, this great continent. And and we met. It was just finishing the Civil War. It was 1989. It was the most dangerous place I'd ever come to. Soldiers and roadblocks and bombed out main streets, the whole 9 yards. And every time we'd make a phone call, we'd hear this very macabre recording saying, the recording would come up and say, the number you have dialed does not exist. And it was like, oh my God, they've killed them all. But this is where I've lived now for 34 years. It's insane and true.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's life. But so that's how we started gathering the research. And through literally this research and moving between continents, we cooked up a story. And then Suni, writes beautifully. And we then subjected our screenplay to people who lived in both sides of this world, and to see whether it had resonance and truth and hopefully humor and pain in it too, everything. And that's how I developed the story.
Yeah. That's amazing. You also cast two of the planet's most gorgeous performers. How did you nab Denzel Washington at that time? And how did you find Sarita Chaudhry?
Well, I nabbed Denzel Washington because we actually wrote it for him, with him in our minds.
Oh, wow.
I had seen him in Queen and Country, this sort of British indie film. And I just that's the guy I want, But then to get him was not so easy, but it wasn't bad because, he met with me immediately upon my asking because of Salaam Bombay, my first feature film, which he just loved. And he loved that film. And that's why I tell many students, I said, never, your work is your best calling card. Never do anything less than the best, because you have no idea which door will open from just something that you're quality, that you're showing your quality. So that Salaam Bombay made Denzel interested in meeting me. And then the story itself, he was quite intrigued by. He said no one would ever give him a story like that, an Asian African romance. No one. In fact, in hindsight now, it's the only romantic role he's ever played.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I can't believe that's true, but it's true. So that's how Denzel came in, and he was very kind, about consulting. I mean, I always let him know where I was going with the casting of Meena, and pretty much there was only one choice. I saw Sarita Chaudhry's an image of her in a kind of alternate magazine, in which she was this wild girl with this mane of hair on a bicycle. And I just loved her look. I loved her lack of vanity, and I loved her intelligence, actually, that shone through, but she was extremely my version of beauty and attract, and I pursued her. I pursued my casting director, Susie Figgis in England. I said, find me this girl in this magazine. And she actually found her and then came in to meet me. And she was a film theory student. She was not even an actor. She didn't think she was an actor, And I said, well, let's just try. And we started working, and she had great instincts, and she understood this part,
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I showed her pictures and stuff to Denzel, and he was like totally cool with it. And then then we cast them both and had these, what I call my talk is cheap rehearsals, where we just, the three of us, we could just talk about everything and air any questions, anything. And that's how we began. And it was quite interesting. I had no idea that Denzel would be so actually scared of being in Mississippi. He said, we had a mansion for him. He said, oh, no, in Greenwood. He said, I'll stay at the Ramada Inn just with you guys, because I'm not staying nowhere in the mansion. Because it was still, as it kind of is now, but then it was quite abjectly segregated.
Yeah. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother is from there, and I always wanted to go with her, and she would always be disinterested, There was nothing to go back to for her. So I can imagine how weighty that is for people. Can you talk about your approach to casting generally? Like, how do you cast your projects? Is there a typical, do you have a practice, or is it different for every film?
Well, it's different for every film, dependent on the roles. But I'm perfectly aware about the commerciality of casting, that you need to sometimes cast stars that, but I often veer towards casting people who simply have the spirit of the character that I'm looking for, rather than only be a movie star. Of course, they are movie stars for a reason. I love the people I've worked with, from Jenna Rowlands to Uma Thurman to Reese Witherspoon to Denzel to Nasiruddin Shah. I mean, they are movie stars. They're so extraordinary at what they do. So it's great if a role exists that needs a movie star that you know. But otherwise, I cast a lot of unknown people, Maori. I look all the time, especially in the kind of films I make, like Queen of Katwe, is full of kids from the streets of Kampala, or young women who have never been asked to play their mothers, because, otherwise, when you make films based in Africa from Hollywood, they just expect you're going to cast people in Beverly Hills, but an African person from here is deeply different than an African American even from there, as we know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the beauty in Queen of Katwe was casting two movie stars, Lupita Nyong'o and David Oyelowo, who were both African from the continent. Lupita from Kenya and David from Nigeria, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. Well, I read that you've known Lupita since she was a child, which I didn't know.
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
That's lovely. Did you ever imagine that you would be working with her, or that she would be an actor?
I did. I kind of did imagine, just because she was always so startlingly fabulous to look at, and also so intelligent and stylish. She was mostly, I regarded her like that as an young adult. She worked as my intern. She worked as my assistant for a year and a half, I think, while I was making the Namesake. And she had literally a feather emerging from her chin over here. And I said, Lupita, how do you? And she said, well, she created her own style all the time, And I loved, she's arresting, and she's really very intelligent. So it was always very cool to work with her on anything we were doing. She coordinated my Maisha Film School. That was how a film student who was a director cast her. It was her first film role right here. And so, she was special from the beginning, but she knew that she had that fire, in her to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I won't go into that. I was just thinking about how you said your experience not being the minority. And I think about how many first generation African kids in the US are kind of killing a lot of fields right now. And I think there's a similar confidence that they have because they've not been the minority. There's a way that has transferred. And I don't think anyone wants to be honest about that, but it's real.
Yeah,
it's
I think
real.
You have something going there. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
It's just a different way,
Yeah.
When South Africans come to Uganda, you can't imagine,
Yeah.
They just can't believe it that people can walk tall and proud in their own country. They've never seen it.
Speaking of Hollywood, you've worked, you've had a lot of films in the capital H Hollywood system, which is notoriously difficult for women, specifically for women of color and of the global South, to find their footing. And something that we've talked about a lot, I talked with Ava DuVernay about this, is that, and Julie Dash, oftentimes you get that one feature, never to be heard from again if it isn't, a terrific, a splashing success. And so with Salaam Bombay, it was a success. So you got a second film and you got a third and a fourth and so on. And how did you manage to make multiple features on your own terms? Do you have any idea, or you've just been going and not thinking about it?
it's the foolish confidence, as I call it, the foolish confidence of the Ivy League. It isn't the Ivy League, but it's that foolish confidence where I think it also comes from, because my roots are strong, I can fly. It also comes from this earlier idea of being at home in your world, but it's you have to be still the capital H Hollywood world is a very, very boys world, and it's a very ignorant world. It was even more so in terms of who we are, and in terms of our stories, and in terms of just a lack of knowledge of. Somebody asked me, I speak in public places, and some audience member asked me, what's the one thing you would change about America?
Yeah.
I said, I would teach geography in high schools.
Yes.
I would tell you that you're only one small part of the world. You're not the center of the world.
Yeah.
There is a vast world, like somebody who told President Marcos he was the president of the Far East. He said, far from where?
That's fantastic.
So it's that tightrope with the Hollywood of it all is like, how do you find the way where you refuse to pander, where you're not grateful, but you're also making a story in which you are making who is the other in their mind become themselves.
Yeah.
That is the point, right? Because we are human.
Yeah.
And that's what I've tried to do. And that's what I think, because it's sometimes or largely thankfully worked, Hollywood only respects money and to some extent talent.
Yeah.
So because people see the Namesake, because people saw Monsoon Wedding, people really saw it, they don't feel so, it's foreign. They don't feel this foreign thing. But that's been a real journey, how to even make a film in which we speak our own languages, but it's not a subtitled experience for you, because you should understand it like that. That's its own film vocabulary that I really have now practiced for 30, 40 years, But I guess partly it's that, but also it's to do with finding independent ways to make cinema that are not dependent only on a studio system. When I made The Reluctant Fundamentalist, I did not want American money, because I knew that they would just make it a whitewashed piece of fluff before I even could, see the light of day. Because it was political stuff. It was saying the unsayable. It was creating a dialogue with the part of the world that after 9/11, they only talk to us about themselves. They never talk to us about us.
Yeah.
So we have to talk now. That was that film. So you can't, always get finance from the people who don't want to listen,
Yeah.
So it's those ways, actually, Maori, that I kept making films, because I didn't always depend on the one source,
Yeah.
But now I'm doing, I love what we do over there. Don't get me wrong. I've just finished directing the pilot of National Treasure, for Christ's sake, it's, and I love that universe of so many of us in that America are from elsewhere.
Yeah.
And, like there's a line in National Treasure, Texas was a part of Mexico, Texas, Mexico,
Yeah.
I love being able to hold that mirror, to who we are now, which is not a white universe anymore.
Yeah.
And so being in that Hollywood world allows me also to tell that story.
So
anyway, so I keep trying.
No, I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Hollywood, oftentimes in like Black film space, there have been these Black renaissances, in the 70s, in the 90s, in the 2010s. And now there seems to be kind of like a South Asian, this like explosion of South Asian participation in capital H Hollywood. And at this year's Oscars, there was like a gathering of actors and producers and directors of the South Asian diaspora. And just where is your role in that? I mean, some of these people are, a generation or two younger than you, but what's your perspective? Do you feel like this is going to be lasting? Do you think there will then be the cycles of Renaissance and not? Or just, what's your observation of this?
Whether it's a Renaissance or people have these big events, those are the popcorn of our time, I think it's all to do with excellence. You practice excellence, you create your world, great if you're South Asian, great if you're Black, whatever, but it's the excellence that will live on, and not the flag that you wave, at this moment in time, So, I mean, when I look at this so-called South Asian Renaissance and all, I'm happy for it, because when I began, it was a lonely, bloody road.
Yeah.
When Jacqueline Bisset and Candice Bergen came up to announce our names in the for the Oscars, they had no idea how to say them, and I mean, so I am glad that people know where we come from and what it is. I'm really glad with the empowering of it and with the talent, man. It's fantastic to see.
Yeah.
Although the talent, we've always had it, from decades. It's just that now they are waking up to us. But I've always been doing this, 40 years now. So it's just great that it's not as lonely over there anymore, But I think it's all about excellence. It's all about us not just taking the dole at the moment, but doing our work, and doing our work in a surprising, ballsy, artistic, and sometimes explosive manner, and but to have company while doing it and to have it be understood easier and have people seeking us out is a beautiful change.
Yeah.
And it's a change that will only amplify the world. It's not to be grateful for. It's not a charity thing. The world is already richer for it.
Yeah. Have you been making or been approached to make work in India now that the industry there has so much more of a global focus outside of like Bollywood? Any Indian television or comedy?
Yeah, I mean, I made Suitable Boy for Netflix, which is a 6-part series 2 years ago, which is still on now. And I am definitely, but more things from India are either originated by me, like the Amrita Shergill project, or internationally. Like I'm doing a series with Amazon now called The Jungle Prince of Delhi, which is a fantastic story written in the New York Times by Ellen Barry about a woman who declared herself the last living descendant of the Mughal Empire, the last empress, and now she was destitute on a railway station for 10 years. And
I remember that story.
That family's story. So yeah, I'm doing, but I'm doing things like that and many things, but not necessarily. When the Bollywood offers come, they don't come often, but when they do come, they are real.
Yeah.
But they are not really always my style,
Yeah.
So my plate is really full, and I'm still doing my own thing. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Really beautiful. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you've managed to balance your career as an artist with motherhood, which a lot of people find impossible. Particularly, I mean, I guess I'm thinking about my mother and her friends in their generation. Can you talk about the challenges you faced, doing this?
I would never have been able to raise our son as we have raised him without my extended family around me. So I had a real support, a caravan, I used to call them, of my mother and father-in-law and my mom. And because I was a director of a show or something, or a film, I could take them all along as Zoran grew up, And so Zoran, our son, was raised like on movie sets all the time, but with a 3-band triumvirate of his grandparents always with him. So we would rent houses and we would have this entourage, and he would grow up and I would come home to good Indian food after shooting in Miami or Uganda or wherever it was, and this system somehow really worked beautifully because it enabled me to keep working. It enabled uh, me to give the security of real loved ones who were raising our boy, and him the familiar love and the comings and goings that this world entailed. In fact, it was so until our son was 6, 7, until he didn't go to school, 6. It was a very easy life making movies, running around with this entourage.
Yeah.
Not so easy, but we managed it. After he went to school, we lived in South Africa. At that time, my husband's a professor and was running the University of Cape Town, and that was difficult initially because I did not want to leave our boy, and then how much can you invent at your desk, staring at Table Mountain, how much it was tough, and I tried to get involved with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I tried to get involved with the movements that were going on around me in South Africa, and they were very vital, but they were not my story to tell. I felt very much so that. And yeah, so those were lonely times where it was not so simple, but I didn't stop working. I always were either concocting the screenplays or flying in writers or working with people to keep going. I don't believe I've had hiccups, but I've always just bulldozed on.
Yeah.
So I think, women are very, very adept from pre-birth of the juggling act, of how to keep it all going. But without that support system of equal hands and hearts with you, it's impossible, It's impossible to raise them right, marinated in love and in the kind of security that I was raised with, So that's what really made a big difference. But it's also then a question of prioritizing what is important.
Yeah.
And for me, the family really is the most important, even before work. I would be a pretty miserable person if I could not work through it. And I worked through it thanks to them. But if you don't get the family right the first time around, you kind of don't get it right.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get it wrong in our work because it's so demanding and it's so much about absences and going from home and going away and so on. So that balance was constantly something that was forefront in my mind, and it influenced sometimes even the movies I made so that I could just be with family,
What has your son, how has he taught you and informed your practice?
Oh, lovely question. Well, being a mom and seeing, and being a daughter-in-law and a mother and a sister-in-law and all these relationships that we take very, very seriously, having this web of relationships is like having a harmonium, having an accordion that can expand and then contract. And it became actually the spirit of my own films. If I think of Monsoon Wedding, I shaped it like an accordion that would expand your heart and then squeeze it, and it's only when you have the expansiveness of laughter can you really feel the acuteness of betrayal or despair, and how do we move that balance of light and darkness? How do we make sexual abuse and incest in a family juxtaposed with the largesse of a father's heart? How? And that is life, though, isn't it? And that is what it's like to be a woman and mom and everything else, all those roles, while it's like you learn, if you can get the rhythm of the what we call the essence of that, then I think it does make for better art, um, but Zoran, firstly, the kids, you were saying, how does he affect me? I mean, firstly, he is the best litmus test, in reading scripts, in reading anything. He sees through it. He's like my brothers were when I was a young one, like just tells you what it is, tells you what works and what doesn't. He also kind of in his, like when he was growing up, he learned how to read, reading Harry Potter, and when he was 13, 14, I was just about to commence shooting The Namesake, which was something that was deeply inspiring to me, and etc. And 3 months before shooting The Namesake, I was offered Harry Potter 4 to direct. And it was after Vanity Fair came out, and they'd also just done the third one with Alfonso Cuarón, and it was such a big hit. And they thought, oh well, we can take somebody of color and be interesting in this direction. And so we had many meetings, and I was in a total quandary because I really was consumed by The Namesake and wanted to make it, and did not really want to step into the shoes of a existing franchise that would take me away for 1 year, if not 2. So, but I was taking the meetings. I thought, my God, for Zoran, he learned how to read on Harry Potter. It's a big thing. I should really do this. And then I was in a mess about it in my head, and I asked him, and he was 14, and he said, Mama, anyone good can make Harry Potter, but only you can make The Namesake.
Wow.
Yeah. And now he's he's a politician for New York, and he really works with the people and walks with them. And it is just a source of great happiness for us.
Yeah.
He lives beyond himself, Yeah.
That's amazing. Let me see. I appreciate this thought about only you could make The Namesake, because I wanted to ask you, you've been working 30 plus years. I know that there are meetings for projects that never happen. And how do you come to center in between, your projects?
I actually long for quietude. I long for this, what I have in Uganda, which is that I just need to be in quiet for a while, because I work very hard every day anywhere, and sometimes it does get overwhelming because it's about several things rather than just one thing. And I tell you, my yogic practice is key foundation to any kind of sense of anchoring,
Yeah.
And the other thing I am is a gardener. I plant, and I see things bloom, and I see things fade, and nature, being here in my my garden where I plant, and also where I plant publicly. I'm a guerrilla. I call myself a guerrilla tree planter, like in tropic islands, in the Nile, anywhere I just plant. It teaches me, it really makes me happy to be with nature.
Yeah.
Which I can't do in the States, and I can't do really much in India. This is my place for that.
Yeah.
And it's a real lesson all the time, what grows, what is happy, why they fade, and that fading, that dying is a part of life, and so these are the things that ground me.
Yeah. When you look back at the work that you've made at this point, what do you see as an organizing thread? What are the assumptions that you've made that have carried you through?
Oh, Maori. um, the assumptions that I've made are that we matter,
Mm.
And that our story is absolutely as valuable as everyone else's,
Mm-hmm.
and to never hide behind that, and want to be someone else,
Mm-hmm.
to take great courage in your distinctiveness,
Mm.
And as I learned more even about where I came from, wow, it's like a treasure that is unfathomable, whether it be the Indian Vedas or the holy books or the artistic traditions or the mosques or the music traditions from the syncretism of, Persia through Afghanistan, Pakistan, through India, through the music that we call ours is actually a complete synchronism of so many cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Just putting one's scholarship or knowledge to any of it yields deep troves. So as you begin to even believe who you are, you discover that there are eons of layers that you also can embolden yourself with the knowledge of, to make you a fuller person.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something I'm constantly in pursuit of.
Mm-hmm.
That knowledge, I suppose, that makes one understand, the journey of expressing oneself, of making art, of of reaching others. That is not generic or conformist or not necessarily what is familiar, but that is one's own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that when you say one's own, that we are a composite of so much. Your grandmother from Greenwood, and you are sitting here running a Black Star Film Festival, and you have, and you have threads there that are hugely unknown to me, to us, to the world. But if you don't make that something that I know, like it's possible to do that. It's possible to make that my story, actually, in knowing yours.
Mm.
That's what I've learned. But very few people, go out on the limbs of those unseen paths.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the unseen paths are deeply human and do exist.
Yeah.
And certainly exist. Yeah.
My last question, I wanted to thank you also for accepting our award. We give out this Luminary Award. We've been doing it every year since 2014, the third festival. A great mentor to me, Richard Nichols, who was the manager for the Roots and so many other people. He passed that year, and it was like this immediate reaction, but it's been this really beautiful way to think about people who inspire us and who are mentors to us, even if it's only in our head. And so, I want to thank you so much for accepting this honor. And I wanted to ask you, in light of thinking about that as a luminary, what is the legacy that you want to leave?
Oh, Mary, don't kill me now.
You can answer that in any way you want. It could be as a cinema or as a human being, but
I don't like to think of that.
I know.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm a creature of the present.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who studies so much the past in order to be fully present.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be genuinely honest, I really don't think of legacies or of myself in that reflective way.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly seek to just live fully in the now.
Yeah.
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 And engage in the way I've been telling you,
Yeah.
you know, because nothing becomes easier with time, actually, in what we do. It keeps becoming what it is, right? You have to find it. And that's the beautiful thing that keeps me alive and keeps me live, like they used to have in the New York subway, step lively now. And I'm stepping lively now.
Yeah.
That's all I want to do, step lively now.
That's beautiful. Well, that's it. Thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank you, Maori. No, I'm just pretending as if it was, but to talk so much is a lot.
Yeah.
It's like I try to talk less in life.
Well, I appreciate your patience with us too. Yeah.